So the passage today is taken from Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 to 14. And I'll read the whole thing. So verse 1. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, 'Tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fattened cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find.' So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He asked, 'How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?' The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, 'Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen.'" Great. I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I introduce the talk, a parable is a story that, a kind of story that Jesus often used to describe something which is true spiritually, but sometimes they can be a little bit hard to understand. And so I hope that my explanation will help us to understand that one as well as we can. So, just to say, all this week, there's been this series of meetings. I hope that you've been to more than just tonight. Maybe some of you are here for the first time. If that's true, then very much welcome to you. But probably many of you have been either to these early evening talks that I've done, or the later talks, or the lunch bar talks, or maybe all of them. Anybody been to every single one? Yeah, mostly the team. So, anybody here for the first time? Oh, good. Oh, that's great. That's a really nice mix of people. So, the reason that we do this, in fact, actually, as you heard earlier, I'm doing this quite a lot at the moment. It's kind of my job to give talks like this, because as you'll have heard, if you heard me speak before, I'm married into a Chinese family, but for 26 years, my wife is from Singapore. But my wife and I have dedicated our lives to try to understand other cultures as best we can. And when we were studying from a master's degree in Singapore in Christian ministry, we were trying to help to understand how this book, the Bible, is relevant to every culture. What we found actually is that it isn't a Western book at all, but it's relevant to every country and every culture. So I give talks like this to help people to understand that, and also so that I can grow in my own understanding of other cultures. But the reason why we do this, the reason why I do this, the reason why the Christian Union puts on events like this is for a very important reason. Is that we really truly believe that we have been given a special responsibility as Christians to offer people an invitation. To offer people an invitation to choose Christianity, to choose Jesus Christ, or not, but to do so based on understanding. So many people in the world have a kind of default choice based on maybe where they grew up or what they've been told. But here's an opportunity while you're at university to hear a little bit more about what the Christian faith really is about, and to choose one way or the other. So our story today is about a wedding. And I don't know if you've been to a wedding recently. I love going to weddings. I haven't been to one for a little while. But 26 years ago, when we got married, we had to decide how we were going to involve both of our cultures in our wedding celebrations. And it actually was quite useful because we found that if we did things in a strange way, the British people thought it must be a Singaporean way, and the Singaporeans thought it must be a British way. So basically, we could do what we liked. But we had our wedding proper, our actual wedding, which was in a church in the UK. But we had two wedding dinners. The first was in Britain, in England, in my hometown. And the second was a few months later in Singapore, according to more Chinese traditions. Although both families are Christian, so there was that too. The English wedding celebration was about 80 people, which for England was quite a decent amount of people. It's not small. But the Singapore wedding dinner was 270 people, which, according to my wife's family, was quite small. Because that's only my wife's side of the family. My family we're not going to make that journey. But for me, as an Englishman living in Singapore, that's 270 people's hands I had to shake on the way going in, and 270 people's hands to shake on the way going out. And for years, I kept meeting people and introducing myself, and they would say, "Yes, I know who you are. I was at your wedding dinner." And of course, I had no idea who they were. But one thing I learned from all of that was that a Chinese wedding dinner is actually primarily about the parents. It's for the parents. It's the parents' chance to throw a big party, to honour their friends and relatives and colleagues and neighbours by inviting them to this big wedding dinner. And the bigger the wedding dinner, the greater the honour for the couple, for the parents of the couple getting married. Now, the story that Jesus told, that we've just read, was about that kind of wedding dinner. It's a more of an Asian-style wedding. It was a story of a king who holds a wedding banquet for his son. We don't hear much about the son, but we do hear about the king. And Jesus is teaching us that God is offering us, you and I, an invitation. But before we decide whether to accept or refuse this invitation, we need to understand who the invitation is from, who the invitation is for, and what the invitation is to. Let me say that again. We need to understand who the invitation is from, who the invitation is for, and what the invitation is to. So I'm going to go through those three things. So first of all, who is the invitation from? So if you look at your stories, and in the first verse, the first sentence, it says, Jesus spoke to them again in parables, these stories. The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. Now, there are just some things you don't say no to. So one of the things I had to learn fairly early on was that when my father-in-law says, right, we're going to go to this restaurant and we're going to eat this kind of food, I don't say, oh, I don't think so. I think we'll go to this restaurant and eat this kind of food. I know that with my father-in-law, I have to say yes. Now, I'm very happy to, not least because he's going to pay. He will not let me pay. And if I do manage to pay, he's very disappointed. But there are just some things that you have to say yes to. Surely, a royal wedding is the kind of thing that you don't say no to. But these people in the story, despite having the great honour it is to be invited to a royal wedding, they refuse. They're too busy. They have other things they would rather do. They're too busy making money to bother with such an event. Now, some in the story actually go much further, and they are violent towards the messengers. And this is why we need to be careful to understand, because this is a picture that Jesus is using to describe the hostility that Jesus and his followers would sometimes experience in inviting people. So it's a lovely activity we're having here, but in some countries or in some times in history, I would perhaps get into a lot of trouble for talking about this, maybe even put in prison. But this story is about a choice. But it's not just about the choice to accept or refuse an invitation. It is about choosing between honour and shame. Between honour and shame. Now, in Western culture, we don't have a very strong sense of honour or shame. We're a slightly different culture, but so for that reason, it's actually a little bit difficult for us to read this story from a Western perspective and fully understand what's going on. But I'm sure that many of you here today come from cultures where honour and shame, or perhaps to put it as gaining or losing face, is actually much more common. To go back, so a year before we got married, we got engaged. Of course, you get engaged before you get married. And we were passing through Singapore from the Philippines back to the UK. And I, of course, had to ask my parents-in-law's permission to marry their daughter. Thankfully, they said yes, no problem. Then we had to catch a plane to go back to the UK that evening. So my parents-in-law called around lots of relatives and said, meet us at the airport, we'll have a quick kind of celebration dinner at a restaurant at the airport before Peter and Lynette fly back to the UK. And so they did, they called round the aunts and uncles and a few cousins, and they got to the airport, and there was a kind of traditional Chinese restaurant, so there's round tables of 10 seats each. But when we saw who was there, and the ages and the hierarchy of who was there, Lynette and I had to sit at the children's table. I was not happy. I was seriously not happy. I thought, in my kind of Western way of thinking, but this is our celebration. This is about our engagement, and I have to sit with the children. But then I realised, and I didn't say anything, thankfully, but I realised, of course, if I had insisted on sitting at one of the other tables, I would have forced one of the older aunts or uncles to sit with the children instead, thus shaming them, or rather dishonouring them and bringing shame on myself. And actually the Bible talks about this thing called sin, which has got, perhaps we understand it slightly differently in different cultures, but that's what is it at its heart. It's the attitude in us that says, no, I want to do things my way, even when actually we're causing dishonour to other people and shame on ourselves. So you can imagine, can't you, that at this wedding dinner, when these people have been invited to such a wonderful occasion, that the fact that they refuse greatly dishonours the king. Now, did anybody watch the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle? A few. Did anybody watch the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton? A few more, right, okay. Well, if you can imagine Prince William and Kate Middleton getting married, and the whole of the media of the world, the cameras are all pointing and recording the event, and there's lots of excitement about this, and then only half the guests come, you can imagine it would just be disastrous. I'm not sure that the British monarchy would actually recover from that. It would be like saying to the Queen, we just don't think very much of you. You see, the invitation which is being offered this week in events like this one, it's not from me. It's not from the members of the Christian Union. It is from the King of Heaven, from God himself. And that's why I wanted to talk about this today, because I think it's really important that we understand that. It's not just that the Christian Union would like a bigger Christian Union and more people to join. It's that actually the King of Heaven is inviting us all to something very special. So who is the invitation for? Well, there's really no time to explain everything about this passage, but the part of the story of the Bible is that God chose one group of people, the Jews, to be like a trial group, a small group of people who, if you think about it, were kind of in the middle They were not from the east or from the west, but if you're from the east, they feel western. If you're from the west, they feel eastern. And his plan was that through the Jewish people, and through Jesus who would be born to the Jewish people, he would reveal himself to the rest of the world. Now you'd think, wouldn't you, that because God had said so much to the Jewish people and had revealed himself and had brought Jesus to the Jewish people, that they would understand and they would accept the message. But we're all human. And some did, but many didn't. Because we all have the capacity to refuse to listen to something that is good for us. So in the story, the first group of people reject the message. So what does the king do? He tries again. Verse 4. Then he sent some more servants and said, "Tell those who I have invited, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fattened cattle have been butchered and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet." You'd think actually if he was really a king that he wouldn't bother sending a second invitation. But he does. And when that doesn't work, he takes the honour away from those who refuse to come and offers it to anyone who is willing to. Verse 9 says, "Go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find." So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, both good and bad. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. So who came to the wedding banquet in the end? Anyone. Anyone who was willing came. All they could find, both good and bad. Now, often in life we talk about deserving something. Or you deserve a rest. Or you deserve a treat. Or he's a good person, he deserves a good life. Or he's a bad person, he deserves to be punished. But in this story, the word deserve is used in a rather different way. Those who deserve to come to the wedding feast, or not, is based not on who is good or bad, but on whether they responded to the invitation from the king. And that's actually a very, very important point. Because God accepts us into his family. He includes us not because we are good enough, as we tend to think of ourselves, but because we have simply accepted his invitation to come. So what is the invitation for? Well, I'm going to, a few hundred years ago, a group of church leaders decided to come together to look at the Bible very carefully and decide what is it that we are here for? What is the purpose of human beings? Have you ever wanted to know that? What is our purpose in life? And they came up with this statement based on the Bible. They said, the main purpose of humanity is to honour God and enjoy him forever. To honour God and enjoy him forever. That's the invitation. Just to do that. Forever, to live in a way which honours him, which brings honour to him as is right, because he's the king of the universe, but also to enjoy him. So to honour God as king, but enjoy him as father. I wonder if you've ever realised that this is what the Bible is about. It's bringing us into a relationship with God that we can enjoy him. But there's more to the story. If you look in verse 11, the little numbers by the lines are called verses. We read that the king came in and saw a man who was not wearing wedding clothes. That doesn't mean to say that he had no clothes on, he just didn't have the right clothes on, okay? And I'm sure that you and I understand that we need to dress correctly for special occasions. When my wife says, "Oh, I can't go to that wedding, I haven't got a thing to wear," it doesn't mean to say that she's got no clothes. It means that she doesn't, in her mind, have the appropriate clothes. You can't go to a wedding in your pyjamas. You can't go to a wedding in your shorts and t-shirt. Because not only will you be embarrassed, well, you may not be embarrassed, but you'll certainly dishonour the person who invited you. Now, the Bible uses clothing to represent something quite important. And when I was quite young, my mother used to make sure, she spent a lot of time and energy to make sure that when I went to school each day, I was dressed in clean clothes that were not torn or dirty. To be truthful, I didn't care at all. But she cared very much. She didn't want me to go to school wearing dirty or torn clothes because it would show her to be a bad mother. Now, the thing is, I was a boy, obviously. So even though I went to school fairly clean, I certainly didn't always come back very clean. Often, especially if I was going to play in the woods with my friends. And the truth is that we get ourselves dirty in life. We try to keep ourselves clean, we try to do the right thing, we try to keep our lives looking good. But every unkind thought, every unclean thought, every selfish desire, every hateful intention, every failure to do what is right, every failure to honour those that we should honour and love those that we should love, it's like getting dirt on our clothes. And you may say, well, yeah, but everyone does those things, they're small things, but actually they add up. Even if you just do one thing in a day that isn't quite right, over a year you've got 365, and then however many years. And even if other people don't notice, God certainly does, and it brings dishonour to him and shame on ourselves. Well, that sounds like bad news, doesn't it? What do we do about it? Well, rather than kind of clean ourselves up and try and make ourselves better, we need a change of clothes. Now, not long after Jesus told this story, he was arrested. He was innocent, but he was arrested on false charges by people who hated him, people who wanted to get rid of him because he was very popular and because he taught things that some of the religious leaders didn't like. And he was sentenced to death on a cross. And he was stripped and beaten and spat upon and mocked and whipped and dragged through the streets and then nailed onto 2 pieces of wood and hung there, naked and bleeding, for anyone to see. You see, the cross is not just an incredibly slow and painful way to die, it is a humiliating way to die, so that anyone can walk past, point at you, assume that you are the worst of criminals and say, shame on you, which is of course what they did. But you see, when Jesus died, in that particularly shameful way, he took our shame, and when he died and was buried, our shame died and was buried with him. A friend of ours, a student from China, told us that she had been divorced. Now, divorce is, people find themselves divorced for a whole range of reasons. But for her particularly, her marriage had lasted less than 2 years, and she was deeply, deeply ashamed at having failed in this relationship. And she didn't want to tell us. She didn't want to tell anyone. But she had come to know Jesus. And she began to realize that when Jesus died on the cross, her shame also was done away with. Her shame died and was buried too. She no longer had to bear that shame. She realized that her past mistakes that had brought dishonor on God now had been wiped clean. It was like Jesus had taken his clean clothes and put them on her, taking her dirty clothes and putting them on himself. Now, Jesus did not he did not deserve to die a shameful death. And so God honored him again by raising him from the dead. And in the story, the king's son is Jesus. And now God wants all people, not just the Jews, not just English people, but Singaporeans and Africans and Chinese and Arabs and people from every tribe and nation and language to attend the celebration, which is the wedding supper the wedding dinner of Jesus. To enjoy him forever. To honour him and enjoy him forever. Let me tell you a story about two women who we knew when we lived in Oxford. One was called Lan. She was from Dalian in China, and she was a postgraduate student in law. Very clever, very sophisticated, very cultured lady. And the other was a very uneducated British lady called Kim, although at the time I didn't know her name. Lan was, as I say, she was a very clever lady. She came to our house for Christmas one day, and she was interested in reading the Bible. So over the following months, she came to our house quite regularly, and she attended a Bible study. And at the end of about 6 months, she called me. She said, "Peter, I've been very interested in what we've been reading, and I agree with it. I do believe it's true. But the problem is," she said, "it's all about forgiveness. Christianity is all about being forgiven. And I don't need to be forgiven. I'm not a bad person." Now, possibly part of the problem is the matter of translation, because the word sin is often translated in the Bible as zui, which means crime. And she thought, well, I'm not a criminal. But about 2 weeks later, she was in a shop trying to get some photocopying done. And the lady in front of her was an older lady who was being really slow, putting the paper in the wrong way round and getting it stuck and just taking a long time. And our friend Lam was getting really frustrated, and she started making sarcastic comments. She thought, oh, good, my English is good enough to be sarcastic now. But then when she left the shop, she thought, gosh, actually, I'm not as good a person as I think I am sometimes. I need forgiveness too. And even though it was a small thing, you may say, that helped her to realise there were lots of things that she had in her life that she needed God's forgiveness for. And so that opened the door for her to receive the invitation. Her life has completely changed. And her family's life has completely changed. Her parents saw the wonderful change that they saw in her daughter and now her son-in-law, that they too live to honour God and enjoy him forever. Kim, this British lady, as I say, I didn't know her name at the time. All I knew was that she was the swearing lady. So every day when I took my children to primary school, she would also take her children to primary school as well. But I avoided her because she was pretty scary. She was kind of a tall, fairly kind of beautiful lady in a fairly hard way. She had tattoos, and she swore continually. Her language was awful, and she didn't care whether she swore in front of the children, in front of the teachers, in front of the parents, and even once she got into a fight, a proper fist fight with another mother, and the police had to be called. So, as I say, she was pretty scary. And then one day, some months or maybe a year later, I noticed her smiling. I thought, that's strange, I've never seen her smile before. And then one day, she stopped to talk to me. And that was even stranger. And I noticed her face was softer and happier. She really seemed to be at peace, and I noticed she'd stopped swearing. Well, I didn't know what happened, and we moved away from Birmingham to go and live in Oxford. But sometime later, we were talking with some friends who still lived there about this, and she said, oh, you're talking about Kim. Well, Kim, her story was that her partner had left her in a difficult position with looking after her children on their own. She had no money. So an older Christian couple had looked after her, made sure that the children were okay, that they had clean clothes to wear, had enough food, and just loved this little family for months. And then one day, Kim turned to her Christian friend and said, I think I've made a mess of my life. Do you think if I ask Jesus, he'll let me start again? And then he'll forgive me? And of course the answer was yes. And that was what I was seeing, the evidence. Even just walking down the street, I could see the difference it was making for her, because she now lived to honour God and enjoy him forever. Two women. One very sophisticated, educated person, one very uneducated person. Both of them received the invitation. But one of them almost missed it. because at first she thought she was too good to need it. Some of us here, after what we've learned this week, will make the mistake of thinking that this invitation is not for me, this is not part of my culture, this is a Western thing. Please don't make that mistake. Some will say, I'm too busy with work right now, I've got other things to think about, I've got my career to think about, I'll think about this later in life. Others may think, I'm too ashamed to accept this. I'm not worthy of such an invitation. But God holds out the same invitation to each of us to exchange our shame for his honour, our dirty clothes for his clean clothes, whoever we are, wherever we are from, and whatever we have done. And there is no cost. That is to say, we cannot pay for this. Some things are too precious to pay for. It's a gift that you need to receive. But please don't think that also being a Christian is easy, because it's possibly one of the hardest things you'll ever do. But God is offering this gift to all of us, to live, to honour him and to enjoy him forever. So my question today is, will you accept the invitation? Thank you very much for listening. I look forward to your questions.
I have is, did Jesus have to die for our sins to satisfy God? Isn't God merciful and loving, even if Jesus didn't die?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Could you just read the question again so that everyone understands it? Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, did Jesus have to die for our sins in order to satisfy God? Isn't God merciful and loving, even if Jesus didn't die?
Yeah, thank you. That's such a really important question, which really sits at the heart of the Christian faith. The answer is that because God is merciful and loving, that Jesus had to die. You see, if you put all the characteristics of God, God is all-powerful, God is merciful, God is kind, God is loving, God is just, God is all those things. The importance is the order in which they come. If at the top of your list, God is king alone, then actually, well, God can do what he likes. But, God is powerful, he can do what he likes, but he won't do things which are against his character. So, you may say, well, it's within my power to take money off an old lady. But you wouldn't do it because it's against your character. At the top of the list, as the Bible reveals God, is that he is both holy, which is pure, and he is loving. Those two are two sides of the same coin. And it's because of that God sometimes won't do things because they're against his character as being both just, as in being perfectly holy, and being perfectly loving. So the way I put it is this. If you imagine a man who is a judge in a court of law, I think I mentioned this the other day, that if he is a judge in a court, then he has to treat the people in the court as those who are being tried for the crimes which they committed. He cannot treat them as his children. But the same person, the same judge, at home is a family man. He's got children. He cannot confuse those two roles. What Jesus did on the cross is essentially to take the punishment in the court so that our case is complete and is finished, so that he can treat us as his children. Now, we don't like the idea of God being of punishing, but the reality is that he longs, through. If you read the Bible, people sometimes pick a page out of the Bible and go, "Oh, God is being angry here." What we don't realize is that God is patient and is saying it again and again and again. He loves us so much And he wants us to be with him so much. He doesn't want us to be punished, so much so that he sent his son to die in that particularly horrific way. But the choice still has to be ours. God will not take away from us our own personal choice, our freedom. So he will not force us to follow him. And that's what this story is really about.
Cool. I think this is somewhat related, but we've had a couple of questions on this about the last part of the parable, so verses 13 and 14. So someone has asked, does it mean that even if we accept the invitation, if we do bad things, we are punished? And someone else has asked, how can we make sure that we're wearing the right clothes?
Right, okay. Yes, thank you. From what I understand of the Bible, that when we go from being in the court, when we're under judgment, to being in the home where we're God's child. So as a parent, I would sometimes have to discipline my children. I mean, nothing very severe. Like what we used to do is to put the kitchen timer on, and particularly the youngest one, Madeline, would have to sit in the corner until she was 5 years old, and she had to sit there for 5 minutes. She didn't like it. Okay? It's not a harsh punishment. It's just to help her to learn to change her behaviour. That's what you do as a parent. But that's a different form of punishment, if you like, than being in a court where you are actually being judged according to the law. And God, so when we become, we accept the offer which is through Jesus Christ, that he has paid the penalty on the cross, so there's no longer any need to be judged in the court of law. We instead are transferred into God's family, and we come under him as God, as Father. Does that make sense? So, verse 13 is a hard one, but that is to say if we refuse the invitation. Now, the weeping and the gnashing of teeth is a phrase which is sometimes used by Jesus, and it kind of denotes regret. It's a regret. It's, oh, I wish I had. I wish I had done that, because I've missed out on the greatest thing, and now I'm left with the punishment. So I know it sounds hard, but it's because God loves us, and because we love you, that we offer this invitation. And that's why we have to take this very seriously. And that's why, actually, you could say, look, I don't like the sound of this, I'm going to walk out and not have anything to do with Christianity. That is your choice. But remember this, that we are invited to honour God and enjoy him forever. We're not invited kind of like, or else you will have to live under this kind of terrible, awful God. He's calling us to be his children. And it's such a great offer, it's such a fantastic offer, that it's not one that we should take lightly.
Great, thanks so much. And we're running out of time. Sorry, would you like to
Hello. Thank you for your talk, it was very interesting. I have a question which I did ask earlier, but I actually had to leave, so I didn't see it being answered.
Yeah.
But many times in the Bible, I was talking to my friend, and the conversation started. Being a Christian, like part of being a Christian is following Jesus' teachings.
Yeah.
And it mentions in the Bible things such as don't drink alcohol, don't eat pork. Jesus himself was circumcised 8 days after his birth.
Yeah.
So why don't Christians tend to follow these traditions, whereas things like people like Muslims, they follow his teachings in that regard?
Right, okay. Jesus didn't say that they shouldn't drink alcohol or eat pork. In fact, actually not drinking alcohol is not in the Bible at all. The only thing it says is to be moderate. So that may be in other teachings, but it's not in the Old Testament or the New Testament. It talks about being moderate. So this is do not get drunk on wine, but Jesus himself turned 600 litres of water into top quality wine for a wedding. Okay, so and about pork, Jesus actually declared all foods clean, because Jesus said that it's not what goes into your body that makes you unclean, it's the thoughts and the words and the actions which come out of you that makes you unclean. But more importantly, Jesus said that he is not come to do away with the law, but to fulfill it. So there's lots of things which are in the Old Testament. The context is everything. So Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament law. So as all the Old Testament practices of sacrificing animals, none of which Christians adhere to, because there is no longer any need, because Jesus himself is the sacrifice. So in terms of being clean is no longer a matter of outward behaviours. Being clean is through accepting the death of Jesus and resurrection and being filled with his Spirit. So it's not a contradiction or that we don't follow Jesus' teaching. It's actually that he has fulfilled a certain aspect of the teaching. Okay. I will happily talk to you more about it. But believe me, Jesus, he didn't say those things. Okay, thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for all your questions. We have so many today. I'm really sorry we can't get to all of them because, we've run out of time, unfortunately. But after this talk, Peter will be at the back over there. If you have any other questions, if you want to pick it up with him, please go over, have a chat. So thanks all so much for coming to Global Vision. It's been so wonderful having you guys here this week. For those of you who have come back several times, we're so happy to see you here, and you're so welcome.
Just to say, it's been a real privilege to be here and to listen to your questions. And I know it's not easy to assimilate all this information in a few minutes, but thank you for hearing me. Thank you.
So, just really quickly, if you'd like to think more about Christianity, if you want to investigate the claims of Christianity any further, the one thing you can do right now is over there in what we call the Connect corner. You can see there are books that you can pick up for free. It's a gift from the CU to you, and all sorts of books, mostly in English, but there are a couple